Question number 7, Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, sir. To the Minister of Finance, does he think it acceptable that 20 multinational companies paid just $1.8 million in income tax in 2014, despite recording nearly $10 billion in annual sales in this country?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I think the member is aware, we don't tax turnover in New Zealand, so it's a bit hard to know. It's possible that the levels of tax are lower than they should be. We expect multinationals to pay their fair share of tax and be good corporate citizens. Most companies play by the rules, but the government is continuing to tighten up the rules around transfer pricing and interest deductibility rules. And New Zealand continues, most importantly in my view, to work with other OECD countries to strengthen international tax settings, because in some respects what is most concerning about some multinationals is they don't appear to pay much tax anywhere, and we need to work with other countries to make sure they pay their fair share as appropriate to each country's rules.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given he just stated that he believes in a fair and equitable tax system, does he think it right that MasterCard New Zealand declared revenue in New Zealand of just $4.5 million and paid tax of only $71,000 in their latest figures, despite sharing evenly in $40 billion of annual credit card billings?
Order, the Honourable Bill.
Well, Mr Speaker, I would have just the same questions as the member. In the first case, we need to ensure that MasterCard follow New Zealand law, because if they don't, they'd be subject to sanctions. Secondly, we need to ensure that New Zealand law is structured in a way that maximises the reasonable tax take. But probably most importantly, we need to work with other countries to ensure that MasterCard pay their fair share of tax wherever they go. Because the fact is, if New Zealand, to the extent New Zealand acts alone, companies are free to just shift their tax burden to other places, and it doesn't make much difference.
Supplementary, sir.
Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuteau.
Given his answer, does he think it right that Visa New Zealand shared in the same pool of credit card billings of $40 billion, and they declared only $3.2 million of revenue and paid only $185,000 in tax in their latest figures?
What are you doing?
Order.
Well, Mr.
Honourable
Speaker,
Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to the member that outrage doesn't fix the problem? This is a matter of New Zealand tax law and how it interfaces with international tax law. And the way we proceed on that needs to keep in mind one factor the member hasn't mentioned, and that is that if a very successful New Zealand company like Xero, for instance, has hundreds of millions of dollars worth of sales in Australia, but has no taxable profit, we don't actually want the Australian government just arbitrarily deciding to tax them. So we have to keep in mind that whatever treatment we apply here will be applied to New Zealand companies overseas. That's why we work with other countries to try and make it fair.
Supplementary, sir.
Order. Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he agree that the government should make applications from major offshore investors buying New Zealand assets or investing here explicitly conditional on paying their fair share of tax?
That's right.
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, that is the requirement of New Zealand. Well, you could put it in, but it's actually the requirement of New Zealand law. If they operate here, even if they don't think it's fair, they have to pay the tax obliged for them to pay by New Zealand law. So we either change the law, which the government...
Order, there's little
which
point.
The government is doing.
Order. I'm sorry to interrupt the Minister, but there's little point continuing with an answer on that sort of behaviour from New Zealand first. Point of order, Ron Mark.
Mr Speaker, we were applauding the Minister's wonderful statement and would like to hear the end of it.
Order. And I'm not interested in hearing anymore. This is question time. It's not about behaviour you'd see at a rugby stadium. Question number...
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Has the member got a
Supplementary,
further supplementary?
I do indeed.
Well, I hope this time your own caucus colleagues will respect the answer that's given. Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How will the Minister help many New Zealand companies which have said that they have missed out on investments here at home because overseas competitors are abusing the tax system here in New Zealand, giving them an unfair advantage over Kiwi firms?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the way we'd help those firms is if they have any knowledge that would indicate that overseas firms are not complying with New Zealand tax law, then those companies will be pursued, and if they have not kept the law, they'll be prosecuted. And the way the member can help those companies is to support the government measures to deal with the complex issues of international tax, where we're tightening up, for instance, transfer pricing, interest deductibility rules, and the use of hybrid financing instruments. And I'd expect New Zealand First will support those measures because they're all aimed at just the problem, which the member and I believes can be mitigated to some extent.
Question number 8.